Hi, my name is Jason Nadin, University of Laverne student. My class is Foundation of Business Ethics, Professor Nuevo Chow, and my case study is on the housing allowance. The cause of effects, my case is based on Mr. Mutambara, who is from Saharan African country of Rambia, has his master's and was working for a company called Newcom, and he had been originally based out of Atlanta and had the opportunity with the company to get relocated to his original country, like I said, Saharan African country of Rambia, so he could go back there and work. The company was allowing him a stipend of $2,000 a month, which would cover his rent, utilities, as well as servants. The caveat on it with this case is the company Newcom expected him to live in a area that was a model of what the company projected and what they wanted the company to project with its employees. So on this case, he was given $2,000 a month. He was expected to live in a safe area and more upscale area that represented the company's model and how they looked. And Mr. Mutambara actually was not living in a very good area, but rather living in a slum area called Stanley. This is where he was originally from. And the allowance was around, his rent was around $300 a month. And yet he was still submitting receipts to his company and expenses for $2,000 a month. And when he was really only paying around $350 to $300 a month. This was found out by a coworker of his, and the coworker spoke with his supervisor, Ms. Barbara Weston. Ms. Barbara Weston ended up confronting Mr. Mutambara and to ask, was this true? Where was he living? He didn't deny it. He did admit that he was living in an area that was less than the needed for the $2,000 a month. However, Mutambara didn't feel it was a slum. He did not feel it was a downgrade where he was living. He still didn't feel it was an issue, that it still represented Newcom, and explained to Mrs. Weston that the difference in the monthly stipend he was actually using for his niece and nephew to help pay for their school. So the cause of events on this is basically he was given a stipend, did not use it correctly as per Newcom standards, how they wanted it, and was basically lying about it. And his supervisor found out and called him out on it. The individual ethical issues. Hello, my name is Jason Nadin, a University of Laverne student. My class is Foundation of Business Ethics and Professor Nuevo Chao. And my case study is called the Housing Allowance. My cause of events for this case is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Mutambara, who was working for a cellular phone company, and which was based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And he was working there in the beginning, and he had the opportunity to relocate back to his home country of a sub-Saharan African country called Rambia. Newcomb allowed him to go back to his country to work and was giving him a monthly stipend, a monthly allowance of $2,000 a month, which was for rent, utilities, as well as for servants, which was a common practice in his country. He was expected to live in an area that was approved to the standards of the company of Newcomb, basically the face of Newcomb. They wanted their employees to represent them by living in a nicer area. That's what the $2,000 a month allowance was for. However, Mr. Mutambara did not live in an area that would be considered by the company standards as acceptable. He was lived in a slum area of Stanley, in Rambia. This was found out by a coworker. A coworker found out where he was living and knew that the rent would go somewhere for about $300 a month. His coworker informed Mr. Matambara's supervisor, who is Miss Barbara Weston. Miss Barbara Weston then confronted Mr. Matambara, and he didn't deny it. He said, yes, he lived in this area. However, he did not feel it was considered a slum. He didn't have an issue with the area that he was living in, nor did he feel that it was a misrepresentation of the company by where he was living. He explained it was a norm in that country for people to get their monthly allowance and basically lie and say, yes, these are my receipts for this, when they were indeed were using the money for something else. Mr. Matambara explained to Miss Weston that he was using the money, the residuals of it, to put his niece and nephews through school, which is based on the article, which is a common practice in Rambia and kind of expected that you provide for your family. So basically the cause of this effects was he was given a stipend, was not using it as per the company standards, was lying about how much he was using of this while using the residuals to help his family. The individual ethical issues in this. Obviously, first and foremost is Mr. Matambara is lying to his company. He's lying, by submitting these falsified monthly expenses, the receipts from the landlord, saying he's paying X amount in rent when in fact he really is not. The company thinks that he's living there. They wouldn't have known this had it not been for one of his coworkers. So ethically, he's saying one, that he's living here when in fact he's not, and using company money. As well as Mr. Matambara ethically doesn't see anything wrong with it. Says it's a norm. He's quoted him saying it's a norm in Africa that they do this, that his family would expect him to help with the other kids in the family. They would be he would be looked upon, down upon, if he was living in a large house while his family was struggling. So he felt his actions were justified by what he was doing, even though in an individual case, ethically, he's lying as to where the money's being used. Organizational wise, obviously his company Newcomb, they have multiple employees that are living in Rambia. They gave the allowance to all of them, expecting them to live in a nicer area that represents the company. The same stipend sounds like is given to the employees as well. And organizationally, obviously, Mr. Matambara is committing a fraud to his company, to the organization, by saying, yes, I'm living I'm using this money for my rent and service and utilities, when in fact he was using a very small portion of it. And the company, as an organization, is using the residuals for something other than for his own personal living within his area. Societal ethical issues. The statement is made in the article with Mr. Mutambara when he's having a discussion with Ms. Watson, his supervisor, saying, this is a norm in my society. This is a norm in Rambia that people do this all the time. He said that, they don't say what is happening. They lie about what the money is being used, and, that they're not using it for the full effect, that it's being used towards something else. In the Rambian society, he states, you're expected to help your family, to better your family. And that's what he felt he was doing the correct thing by helping his nieces and nephew by using the residuals to put them through school. As we looked at a rule-based theory, and basically in a rule-based theory, the set of the rules, there's either a right or a wrong, and it's not the consequences that determine if this is right or wrong. And some examples would be, I believe it's pronounced deontology, which is an example of a rule-based ethics. That is not necessarily in our book, but I looked upon outside to come up with an example. And based on the Ethics Century of 2016, it defines that deontology is a theory that suggests actions are good or bad according to a clear set of rules. So based on a rule-based theory, you're right or wrong based on rules. It's what it is. It's not anything other than these are the rules. It's either right or it's wrong. There's not a gray area. So, as it goes through an example, which I had read as well, an example was giving that if in deontology, that the belief is that killing someone is wrong, even if it was self-defense. So meaning the rules are you don't kill somebody. However, there are circumstances, you're protecting yourself, self-defense, and but based on a rule-based theory and with the deontology, it's still wrong. Consequence-based ethics. The consequences of ethics basically is right or wrong based on what the outcome is on it. So if something is good, and the outcome is good, then that's good. If it's something is bad and the outcome comes out bad, it's bad as well. So the consequences, like I said, is based on what the final outcome is, what the final findings are. Two examples would be hedonism, I believe that's how it's pronounced, and utilitarianism. Hedonism is basically it's a pursuit of pleasure. Some examples, is that basically that, and hedonism, that the ultimate goal is to be happy, to have the pursuit of happiness, to have pleasure, to have satisfaction. Where in utilitarianism, basically it's determined the right or wrong, and utilitarianism is based on the outcomes as well through it. Utilitarianism views ethics as another, good and bad are determined by the happiness that it produces. So utilitarianism might say that, there's a quote that says the greatest good is that which produces the greatest happiness. So utilitarianism is trying to be in a positive, basically saying, okay, the outcome is good, so it's good. You want to try to come with a positive outcome. So your rule-based outcomes. if we break this down and we take it to the case that we're in with Mr. Mutambara, obviously rules were in place. Rules were in place saying you're given this stipend, this monthly allowance. It's to be used for you to live in a certain area. It's to be used for utilities, for rent, and for service. So the rules by his company, Newcomb, are set, saying this is what is expected for you to use the money. Even though, if you look at it, the residual of the money he used, it was a positive thing to help his family, to help his nieces and nephew. However, it's not part of the rules. Therefore, the rules were broken. Consequence-based outcome. Basically, some came up with this case. There's two outcomes. There's a good and a bad. There really is. The positive, if you look at it, Mr. Mutambara, he's not taking the residuals that even though he's lying, saying he's $2,000 a month, he's not taking the residuals and, going out and partying, buying a luxury car, or just traveling, excessive, or doing something that's ridiculous. He's actually using the money to help his family, to help his nieces and nephews, to better their education, to get them to school, which is a good thing. It's a positive, and consequence is a good outcome. However, on the bad, Mr. Mutambara lied. He obviously is saying he's using this money for rent when he's not. He lied to Newcomb, to his company, as he's sending in these fraudulent monthly expenses. So the consequence is bad. I mean, in reality, if you look at it, if it's cut and dry, he lied. So some alternatives for the consequences of Mr. Mutambara. What are his options? Now that it's been out, his supervisor knows what's going on. And, I have 4 listed as we go through. I mean, his objects, obviously, the first and foremost, he can move. He can move out of the slums. He could actually go into what Newcomb feels is a adequate area to live, and go there and spend the $2,000 a month as they expect him to spend, and just be to what they figure that is supposed to be done. You could look as it, he could go to Newcomb and ask, hey, this is my situation. Are there exceptions? Can we possibly work out, okay, I'm in this area, look, it is not a bad, and I'm using the money for a positive use. Is that an option for me to have? It may very well may not be. In our corporate world, usually it's not. That they're going to come back and allow it, because that's saying if you let one do it, you're going to have to let the rest of them do it as well. Another option on this, which unfortunately could be Ms. Weston, his supervisor, could terminate his employment. And based on the grounds, he was lying to the company, he was falsifying documents, he's falsifying, where he's spending the money. So obviously it'd be grounds for dismissal. And possibly the final could be Mr. Mutambara could, not to deal with his family and having to move to a nicer part, and having to, have that put upon him and looked upon. He could ask, hey, maybe he could go back to Atlanta, where he started, and work there. So 4 kind of different scenarios, either way that, to go with this. Now, if you look at it from the behaviors of significant, group alternatives, obviously the company Newcomb is not going to allow Mrs. Weston, if they were to find out, let's just say it's a scenario, Mrs. Weston decides, you know what, I'm going to let you live that way. I'm going to keep it on the down. I'm not going to say anything. We'll just keep going status quo. That's not going to work, because obviously if Newcomb found that out, now you've got 2 people lying, 2 people committing fraud. They're going to terminate employment. So, that's not going to work. If Mr. Mutambara decided to move out of the slum and to a nicer area, as he said, in this case, he'll be looked upon. He'll be looked down upon. He'll be looked on as being better, not helping his family, and not, being there for them, and trying to be, while they're struggling, he's living just fine. So society is going to look at him in a different way when he could be helping his family. Some potential solutions. You know, again, Mr. Mutamba could work for, move to a different area, see if he could work with Newcomb. You know, I mean, tell him, here's what I'm going to do. Here's the $2,000 a month. I'll stick to what's allowed, and I'll be in the area that you're in. You know, if he did that, if they're not going to terminate him for ethically lying to them, the positive upside is he could still live in his home country. He could still be close to his family, even though his family might not agree to that. But he can go to them and say, "This is my company's policies. These are the rules, and this is where I'm gonna have to live, but still have the interaction with the family and still be in his home country." Either way, his family's not going to be happy because obviously you're not helping the niece and nephew with the education, you know, for them. You could see maybe possible solutions. Newcomb can look and see, you know, this may create a domino effect where they go and look at all the Rambian employees that are there and see, are they doing the same or not? You know, if they are, maybe then that's something for them to look at and make it a new norm that would allow them to utilize the residuals of the money with them. However, and that might help Newcomb to kind of to mitigate any negative feedback from possible other employees that are in other countries, because you need to base it by, I think, country basis. You know, each country is different as they require for your living and where you're at. You know, at the end of the day, on this case study, is difficult as you read through it. I mean, it's a good and a bad, and as you go through, you know, Mr. Mutambara is doing something positive with the residuals. He's deciding not to live in a large place, live in a home and just that's bigger and just enjoy the money. He'd rather live in a substandard place, even though he doesn't feel it, but Newcomb does, and take that money in the residual to utilize it to help his nieces and nephew. And it's a win-loss situation, especially ethically speaking. Ethically, he's lied to the company. He's, you know, falsifying documents. However, on another ethical form, he's helping his family. He's taking the residuals and being proactive with those residuals and putting it to help his nieces and nephews. So, you know, it depends how you ethically look at this. Says, you know, I would hope to think that Newcomb would work with him, and but yet again, they may not, because he should have been upfront from the beginning. He should have told them in the beginning, this is everyone I want to live, and this is what I want to do. They may have been much more willing to work with him, versus now they're coming after the fact and finding out that he's been lying this whole time and not honest with them. These are my references that I used for this case study, and I will post the YouTube link on my last slide as well. And thank you very much for your time. Mm-hmm.